So there have been some Bernie or bust people posting on my Facebook page, kind of having arguments with other people about how they're not going to vote for Clinton no matter what. I think it's important that people have a long perspective and a perspective that's from history. So I'm putting this clip up, and it comes from bestofleft.com podcast. And if you want to go there and check it out, it's an awesome podcast that has a lot of progressive clips. Have a listen and tell me what you think.
Today, I want to talk to you about theory of change. And in politics and social justice activism, all those sorts of things, theory of change is a lot like the scientific method is to science. In science, you come up with an idea and you want to test it and you run some tests, and if it goes wrong, then you got to start over. In politics and activism, you have a goal that you're trying to reach, and so you have to come up with a theory of how you're going to get from here to there. So there are a lot of different theories as to how to do that. You can lobby politicians, try to get them to pass laws you think will be good. You can protest. They could be against the government or against corporations or just about anything. You could file lawsuits, like we heard about in today's show. If a bad law is passed, you can file a lawsuit, try to have it overturned. And then, of course, there's voting. If you vote for one candidate over another and they get elected, well, then you're going to have a different outcome based on who you voted for and who ends up being elected. And then I have a personal theory of change with this show. My theory is that if I make a show full of information that's interesting enough for people to actually listen to it, then people will have their minds changed, they will be more informed, they will make better decisions, they will have conversations with their friends, ideas will spread, and through that, benefits to society will emanate. So clearly the discussion on voting strategy has begun. It's been going on for a while now, just not on this show. And it happens every primary season like clockwork. And so in the last episode, we heard from a caller who said that he was a Democrat, undecided on who to vote for in the primary, but he was urging us to unify as a Democratic Party and come together and vote for whoever the general election nominee is, because that person will be much better than whatever Republican is nominated. And then today we had a response saying, basically earn this vote or lose. The idea that I'm not going to vote for anyone unless they have genuinely earned my vote, which means that going into the general election, if the general election candidate has not earned my vote, well, then they just don't get my vote. And maybe no one gets that person's vote. Maybe it goes to a third party. There are a lot of different options there. And so I'm happy to have this conversation continue, but I want it to happen in the context of a theory of change. So whatever strategy for voting you have, I simply urge you to have a theory of change to back up your decision. So there are drawbacks to every strategy, benefits and drawbacks, of course. So I'll just go real quick through the two that we've heard. If you are urging party unity and are promising to vote for whatever Democrat is in the general election, then the drawback of that is that you have given up some of your leverage. If you are promising to vote for whatever the general candidate is, well, then you don't have leverage over that candidate to be able to bend them to your will. And so maybe that person gets elected, but maybe they don't do that good of a job because they didn't promise to do a good job because we didn't extract those promises from them by using leverage over them. Now then the reverse, sort of ironically, is also true. If you say, earn my vote or lose, and you're demanding something that that candidate has no chance of ever being able to promise, then the candidate may just give up on you and say, okay, well, if that's what you want from me, you're not getting it, so I'm going to stop even having a conversation with you. But let's say that doesn't happen. Okay, great. They have not given up on you, and so that's good, and maybe they come sort of a little bit more towards you, but not all the way towards you. So then that leaves you to decide, okay, am I going to stick to my guns and not vote for the person who I said I wasn't going to vote for unless they really earned it? So then the drawback is if you sit it out or you vote for a third party candidate or whatever, then mathematically speaking, there is an infinitesimally small difference being made in the chances of that candidate being elected. Of course, granted the fucked up system of our electoral college, this only counts if you're in a swing state. So it doesn't count for me. It doesn't count for a lot of people. But if you're in a swing state, then it actually does matter. So if you decide to not vote or vote for a third party or something like that, then you actually are having an impact on the election. You are not voting for either a Democrat or a Republican, and in making that choice, you are actually influencing the election, and whichever way it goes is partly due to the people who voted for Democrats, partly due to the people who voted for Republicans, partly due to all the people who didn't vote, and partly due to the people who voted for a third candidate. Everyone in a swing state who has the ability to vote, whatever they do with their option to vote, is having an impact on the election. So I welcome this conversation. I'm positive more people will have opinions on this. I simply ask that when you express your opinion, please explain your theory of change. How does your decision, how does the strategy that you are endorsing get us to where you want to go? Hopefully, if you are endorsing a strategy, then you've thought it through and you think that your strategy is the best theory of change. So that's what I want to hear from you. Keep the comments coming in.
Hey Jay, this is Marty. I am a trans woman from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm calling in reference to episode 1004. And what I'd like to say is it's actually not about the content of the show, but the comments after about voting. Generally, I agree with Elon James White about a lot of things, but this whole kind of black and white attitude about either they earn your vote or else, this binary choice, I don't think you can, as a trans person myself, I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to have 8 more years of George W. Bush, because I hate to say this, but any Democrat is going to be infinitely better. Or you could say, I would say that if you vote for Hillary Clinton, you get George Bush. I don't know anybody that would say that. And as a trans person, this isn't just some fuck it decision. It has an effect on my life, on my security. To make it some kind of macho, you either earn my vote or forget it. You can't do that in this especially this election cycle. You're talking about candidates that, for LGBT people, especially like Ted Cruz, they're scary. Their positions are scary. They want basically to make me going to the bathroom illegal, because in one place I'll get beat up and in the other place I'll get arrested. What kind of choice is that? So I'm going to vote, because in the United States, we have a two-party system. That's just reality. And the primaries are the place where you pick the best candidate. The general is where you pick the least worst. In the UK, they have a coalition government. We don't have that here. So once it comes down to the general, you do have a binary choice. Or, as you said in your comments, your vote doesn't matter. If a multimillionaire like Ross Perot could run an effective third-party campaign and only get 20% of the vote, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You are throwing your vote away if you vote third party. Support the most progressive candidate in the primaries. I already did vote for Bernie in Wisconsin's primary. That's all I can do. Vote like your life depends on it, because it may, especially if you're in a marginalized community. So think about that. Thanks, Jay.
Hey, Jay, it's Wade. You know, I've heard a lot of comments, read a lot on the internet this primary season, and there's a lot of ridiculous fear out there. I referenced the last call to your show last week, and to people like that, and that person's not alone, To people like that, I say you're having a profound misreading on politics. If you think that a Ted Cruz presidency is actually going to end your life, then why the hell do you support big government to begin with? Why do you want the government to be even more powerful? If you really believe that Donald Trump or Ted Cruz is actually going to kill you, then you don't really believe in our system of government then. So I don't even know why you're in the political process to begin with. What I'm trying to say is it's just a presidential election, people. And my side did the same thing when Obama was elected. We were all supposed to be communists by now. You know, y'all remember. It didn't happen. It won't happen. I am not going to vote for the president this year. And my theory of change is this. Wherever there's a void, a politician will step in and take advantage of those people and those votes. And I'm hoping that over time, a third party, maybe even a fourth party, will rise to take advantage of this. I think the mass media is losing a lot of power. I think that Facebook, Twitter, and the fact that there's not as many cable and dish subscribers as there used to be, and that number will continue to grow, including myself, I don't believe that they have the power that they used to have. And therefore, the hold that the Democrat and Republican parties have on the media will slowly, over time, weaken. And this will give rise to a third party. And I'm trying to send a message that I don't support either of them. And I'll give you a great example. When y'all voted for Obama, did you think in a million years that he would ever support something like the TPP? Of course not. And Clinton says she doesn't now, and if you believe that, then you're hopelessly lost. There's no way around the TPP. None whatsoever. So, who do I vote for? Now, the TPP will affect everybody. No matter your race, no matter your sexual preference, no matter what gender you prefer today, nothing will save you from the TPP. No politician. It affects everybody. So who do I vote for? Who? And this is where I'm at in politics. This is one issue. I'm tired of the two-party system. I found myself nodding along with the second caller from last week's show. That's the guy I found to be the most inspiring. I believe, I agree with him. And my theory of change is hopefully to create enough of a void that somebody will look at that and say, my God, there's a lot of people out here that are really pissed at both parties. I can take advantage of this. That's my hope. That's my theory. That's what I'm doing. I'll vote for everybody else, but not the president. Anyway, Jay, have a good one.
And now on to Wade. Man, sometimes Wade says things, and I'm like, I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed. First of all, a few weeks ago, some other callers were getting in trouble because they responded not to what Wade actually said, but to what they sort of assumed he meant. Because he's a conservative and he says conservative things, they took what he said way further than he meant it. And they got some pushback from that, and, Wade was pissed off about it. So I really thought that he would be more careful about not doing the exact same thing. And then today he calls in, and in response to a trans woman who pointed out the obvious truth that Republican politicians pose an actual risk to her health and safety because they want to criminalize her ability to use the restroom, absolutely stoking the possibility of violence being done against her among a whole lot of other policies that are explicitly anti-trans, a concern that is absolutely real, deadly real, as shown by stats of murder and assault rates against trans people. And Wade hears that, and his interpretation, apparently, is that this caller believes that a Republican president would be some sort of militant dictator or something who would murder their own citizens. And, that's not even a leap in logic that he's making. That's just total disconnection, no idea where it's coming from, no interest in listening to what people are actually saying. Hence, my disappointment. Secondly, I was really surprised to hear him imply, more or less, that the president doesn't really matter that much, especially when it comes to who lives and who dies. For those of you who don't know, Wade was a Marine who served in our most recent escapades in the Middle East. And I don't really think he needs me to point this out, but I'm going to say it anyways, that I can draw a line as straight as a fucking arrow between the election of George W. Bush in 2000 and the deaths of some of Wade's friends, or if not direct friends, then at least his brothers in arms in those wars. I mean, if Al Gore had been elected, I think it is indisputable to say that he wouldn't have lied us into war in Iraq, and thousands of Americans and Iraqis would still be alive today. And if he wants more death, if Al Gore had been elected, then it is obvious that John Roberts and Sam Alito wouldn't be on the Supreme Court right now. And when the Obamacare lawsuit made it all the way to the Supreme Court, they would not have struck down the mandate for states to expand their Medicaid budgets with federal dollars, and millions more people would have health insurance right now, some of whom, I promise you, have died in the past few years due to lack of access to affordable health care. And I'm sure many of them died cursing Obamacare when they should have been cursing John Roberts, George W. Bush, and the Republican governors of their states for blocking them from being able to access the health care that Obama and that policy was trying to supply. And don't even get me wrong, Wade and I even agree that single payer is the obvious solution that needs to be implemented, but that doesn't detract from the fact that those lives were lost due to that presidential election and the Supreme Court justices who were appointed and will continue to serve for decades to come. And that doesn't even get us to Citizens United. So yes, many people have a vision of a future that involves, hoping we will break out of our two-party system. And I can certainly commiserate with that. And not only do I commiserate with it, I wholeheartedly encourage everyone to do whatever it is within their power to make that change and many other structural changes happen. Just remember that you have a limited number of resources. You have a limited amount of energy, a limited amount of time, and a limited number of votes for you to cast. And you should devise a theory of change that puts all of your resources to their very best and most productive use that does the most good and the least harm. Keep the comments coming in. The number again, 202. And now we'll hear from you.
Hi, Jay. This is Marty, the trans woman, calling from Madison, Wisconsin. I was listening to podcast 1008, the voicemail messages, and specifically the one from Wade, and I just had to respond. The assertion that, quote, big government doesn't affect people's lives is just ludicrous. I'll give you two examples. One, I was saved from actually being jobless because of the Obama administration's their policy on Social Security and gender. Because my employer was telling me, because my Social Security, my gender on my Social Security account and my driver's license and birth certificate didn't match, and if those couldn't be matched up, that they would fire me. And my protection came from the Obama administration and the changes that have been made since. That's literally kept me from being fired from a job. Secondly, if you want to think back to pre-Obama, I'll give you an example of marriage equality, the fact that it wasn't passed or in effect in Florida. Lisa Pond, her and her partner were on vacation in Florida, I believe, and she was playing basketball with her kids and collapsed. And she died alone because her partner didn't have access because they were a lesbian couple and couldn't get married. So I really want to tell a way to stick his white privilege, because I have to guess that he's a white, cis, heterosexual male, because my God, the amount of privilege that was spewed in that voicemail was unbelievable. I hate to pull that card out, but it's true. It's to believe that voting doesn't have an effect on people's lives is just, it shows an amount of privilege that is just, you're at the top of the food chain and you can't see your own privilege.
And now finally, I just heard this new clip today. I was listening to This Week in Blackness while making lunch for myself, and I just happened to hear Imani Gandy from This Week in Blackness, woman of color, gave this perspective, and I thought, yeah, she said it. I don't have to. I'll just play that.
I think different things about the sort of person that is either going to abstain or going to vote third party. If you are a white man, and you're talking about, I'm going to vote for Trump or I'm going to abstain because out of the fire of that will burn in the United States will rise this progressive phoenix from the ashes. Fuck you. It's not going to happen. And in the meantime, all the people who are not white men are going to suffer. If you are, for example, a young black millennial and you don't like Hillary Clinton and you think Jill Stein's your girl and whatever, I might have a conversation with you about why basically voting third party is like not voting at all. Although I understand that people want to be more included in the system and maybe we need to split up the part. I understand all of that. But if you're a black millennial living in Ohio, I might like to sit you down and have a conversation about what it would mean for Donald Trump to win your state. If you are anybody living in any solidly blue state like California, I don't give a fuck what you do. Yeah. But honestly, if you are a white guy and you are out on social media or anywhere advocating for Donald Trump, as Salon.com keeps publishing this jackass, Walker Bragman or something, who literally made the claim that if we just let Trump win, then in 2020, shit's really going to pop off for Democrats. That has never happened. People said that in 2000. We lived through 8 years of Bush, and what did we gain? A multi-billion-dollar war that killed millions of Iraqis, thousands of Americans, and for what?
Okay, now just a couple of points to wrap up. First of all, if you find yourself in the group of people who fear that a Clinton presidency would sap the energy out of the progressive movement, especially the more radical wing of the progressive movement currently being embodied by the Bernie Sanders campaign, then I really think that you are misreading things. Because first of all, as Imani was just saying, we had 8 years of George W. Bush, a disastrous presidency filled with illegal wars. If any presidency in living memory should have elicited a radical change, that was it. And yes, Obama certainly made himself sound like he was somewhat of a radical change, but he turned out to be an incredibly moderate Democrat. So first of all, the strategy of let's make things worse in the hope that that'll make things better, I think is misguided for that reason. Secondly, though, under a Democratic presidency, under this moderate Democratic president, we've had things like the worldwide movement against climate change, sort of spearheaded by 350.org. We've had Black Lives Matter in this country fighting for racial justice. We've had Occupy Wall Street fighting for economic justice. And then we've had the whole progressive movement come together and propel Bernie Sanders to more victories than anyone gave him a chance of receiving. And all of that happened under a Democratic presidency. So clearly, the progressive movement has not been sapped of its energy. People aren't just sitting back saying, oh, well, it's okay. We have a Democrat in office. We don't have to do anything. That is obviously not the case based on what has actually been happening over the last 8 years. Now, secondly, to get back to the main point being made by those clips that I played, I have a friend of mine, personal friend, who actually espoused basically the same idea that we heard from Austin, that, you know what, I do think that we should rally against Hillary. I actually think that it would be better to have a Republican in office, not because he thinks that a Republican would have better policies, just the opposite. He thinks that a Republican would make things so bad that it would cause an absolutely ground-shaking revolution to happen. And aside from the fact that there's no evidence that that could or would happen, the point that I made was, well, that kind of sounds like that old quote from the Vietnam War, well, we had to burn down the village in order to save it. And his response was, well, yeah, sort of, but hopefully we don't have to burn down the whole village, maybe just a few huts. And the key thing to remember is that those huts belong to actual people, and we know who those people are. And for the most part, they're not the same people advocating this slash and burn strategy of making things worse in order to make them better. White guys are not on the front lines of the terrible policies that a Republican is likely to put in place. They're just not. That's just not how things work. So it's people of color, it's women, it's members of the LGBT community, it's people in poverty, it's immigrants, it's the people who live at the intersections of, some or many or all of those things. So if you are advocating a voting strategy or an actual campaign to elect a Republican in the hopes that things get worse so that they can get better, then I think what you need to be comfortable doing is looking any one of those people in the eye, those people who are on the front lines of those policies, and be able to say that to them, yes, I am willing as a at least marginally more privileged person than you, I am willing to gamble with your life, with your livelihood, with your safety, because the negative impacts of my plan are going to hit you first, but I think it's for the greater good. So I am willing to put you at more risk than myself to put my plan forward. And if you can say that and be comfortable with it, then and only then do I think you are on very solid, intellectually consistent ground to do anything other than fight as hard as you can to prevent someone like Donald Trump from becoming president. But I had a couple more thoughts about things that I think are often misunderstood, so I wanted to try to clarify those. First, the easy one. I hear this basic argument a lot, as represented here by a part of an email I got from Keith. He says, fear can be a terrible thing. They used it to control us after 9/11. For every election, the liberal voter has been manipulated by fear into voting for ever slightly more right-leaning Democrats. We must have the courage to think long-term and not give in to this soft control by the wealthy. Do not let the short-term fears of things like bathroom laws distract you from the long-term form of manipulation they perpetrate. Okay, so let's address the issue of fear of Republican governance. Just about 100% of the people I've heard supporting the basic Bernie or bust movement have supported that stance with some variation on the idea that a Trump presidency just wouldn't be that bad and that we need to stop fearing having a Republican as president. Now, if we had a recent history that backed up that position, then I would find it a lot more reasonable. But let's think about it. The last time a Republican won the White House, he presented himself as a compassionate conservative and spoke very openly about not blaming all Muslims for the acts of a few terrorists. And then he took the country into an illegal war that killed 1 million people while literally calling it a crusade. Now we have a guy who presents himself as a fascist, narcissist, pathological liar with borderline personality disorder who says he wants to take severe action against basically every brown person in the country. And we have liberals pinning their hopes on the idea that since he's such an overt liar, he's probably lying about being as fascist as he sounds. That is rock solid logic. These people make this argument as though we've had a pattern of Republican presidents who we were totally afraid of before they were elected, who turned out to be, not so bad after all in the end. That is not the case. It is literally the opposite of the case. And the last guy who did really unbelievably terrible things not that long ago sounded downright reasonable compared to Trump. Now, here's the thing. Keith is saying that the system is rigged in such a way as to use fear to force voters into picking between only two options, and neither of those options are very good. This is true and terrible and needs to be overthrown. I am not at all blind to that, but it's also real. It's not a hall of mirrors illusion. As much as the two parties are similar and rig the system in their own favor, there are actual differences between the two, and those differences can usually be counted in the lives of brown people abroad and poor people at home. Okay, here's the second point I hear a lot, also from Keith's email. He hit both of these. He says, I am not responsible for the voting of my ignorant neighbor. If Trump wins, it will not be because I helped put him there. It will be because my neighbor helped put him there. I will have voted my conscience and sent my message. Okay, now I agree with that, but I think what we're having here is a miscommunication between moral culpability and mathematical reality. For my part, I've been talking about the math, not the morals, but let's get into that now. A moral vote for the Green Party doesn't make you responsible for anything Trump does if he wins. Just like I don't think that a vote for Nader in Florida in the year 2000 didn't make you morally responsible for the Iraq War. The people who voted for Bush because they genuinely supported him are obviously the most culpable for the actions he took. Now, sort of similarly, any enthusiastic Clinton supporters would be the most morally culpable for actions that she takes as president, whereas someone who pragmatically votes for Clinton just to avoid a Trump presidency, but who then immediately, fights against all of her more conservative positions, should be considered to have some, yes, but far less moral culpability for the actions that she takes, even though the value of the votes of an enthusiastic supporter and a grudging pragmatist hold the exact equal weight. And now, if you vote for a third party, do you really have zero moral culpability for the outcome of the election? I would look at it this way. There are three people standing near the edge of a cliff. Person A pushes person B towards the cliff, and person C is standing close enough to try to grab person B before they fall off the edge. There are three possibilities. Person C can try but fail to catch person B, they can try and succeed to catch person B, or they can not try at all. I think we can probably agree that if person C tries to catch their friend, then whether they succeed or fail has no bearing on their level of moral culpability. They did their best, they tried to save a life regardless of the outcome. But what if they decide not to try? Surely, obviously, person A, the pusher, holds the most moral culpability by a country mile. But does person C have no culpability for not trying to help, even though they had the opportunity? Obviously, they don't have as much as person A, but do they have zero moral culpability? That's a tough one. That's what people are basically debating. Now, morality is kind of a squishy thing, and it can be debated endlessly, but math is not squishy, and it cannot be debated in the same way. When it comes to voting, it is very much a binary option. You can either vote or not vote. There are no other options between those. And if you choose to vote, you can only vote once, and you can either vote for a candidate who has a chance of winning, or you can vote for a candidate who you know has zero chance of winning. There are no other options between those in this corrupt, totally rigged, fucked up system that we have right now. Now, I agree that the rationale behind your vote has a huge effect on your moral culpability of the outcome of the race, but it has no effect whatsoever on the math of how that vote turns out. Votes are real and they have consequences. So here's the deal. I'm not going to go out of my way to accuse you of being morally culpable in the event of a Trump presidency, as long as you don't try to argue that your third-party vote isn't mathematically identical to not voting, which is essentially declining to act to avert a probable disaster when you had the chance.